Hello, everyone. Welcome to Center for Global Higher Education seminar series. This is seminar 254. My name is Lili Yang. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at CGHE, and today we'll be hearing from 4 colleagues from Peking University and Hangzhou Normal University in China on the influences of natural disasters, including earthquakes and air pollution, on college access and graduate mobility. This is a really important and somewhat timely presentation, as we will be able to draw some valuable insights and clues from this study for understanding the ongoing pandemic and also possible challenges in future. We're very pleased to host our 4 presenters today. We have Dr. Yang Po, a tenured associate professor at Graduate School of Education, Peking University in China. Po is the chair of Department of Economics of Education and Administration. Her research interests focus on college student development and employment, and higher education and vocational education finance. We also have Dr. Lu Wei, who is a lecturer in economics of education at Hangzhou Normal University. Wei received his PhD from Peking University in 2020. His research interests include human capital investment and, in particular, household spending on private supplementary tutoring. There is also Ms. Yulian, who is a PhD student at Graduate School of Education, Peking University. She is interested in the long-term impact of natural disasters on human capital accumulation and the effectiveness of online learning. And then we have Mr. Zekai, who is also a PhD student at China Institute for Education Finance Research at Peking University. He is interested in financing for scientific research and evaluation of science funding programs. Welcome. Well, before I hand over to our presenters, I'd like to briefly go through some housekeeping protocols. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CG website in due course. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. Normally, all these materials will be available online tomorrow. Please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There is no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please do so when asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentation, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. When invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and state your name and where you are from. We often have many questions, so it's recommended that you come in early. Our presenters will be speaking for about 30 minutes before moving on to the Q&A session. Without further ado, I'll now pass over to our presenters for today's CG webinar. The virtual floor is yours. I guess, Dr. Yang, you will be going first.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang, for this very nice introduction. And I would like to thank the Center for the Global Higher Education for this wonderful opportunity to share some of our recent research on environmental shocks to higher education. Today, there are 4 of us to present, so we'll go into the sequence as Dr. Lu Wei go first, and then Dr. Yulian, and then Dr. Zekai, and I will do the summary conclusion part. Okay, let me just share my screen so we can start our discussion today. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much. The current pandemic actually generated a lot of research interest in the recent months. There have been a lot of discussion on how the COVID-19 pandemic actually generate global-wide learning losses. We invited recently Professor Susanna Lau from Brown University, and she conducted a lot of research on the US settings talking about the learning losses. And the World Bank also have some estimates on how the pandemic actually influenced K-12 education, especially in terms of students dropout and also psychological well-being be influenced by the pandemic. Today, we focus our research on how the pandemic influenced higher education. There are also some prior research on how the pandemic actually influenced, for instance, college students' course-taking behavior, also in terms of their grade points average, and also in terms of course selection. But all this kind of research is pretty much focused on the process or the production of higher education within the institution. But there wasn't a lot of discussion about other kind of important points or important components of higher education, for instance, college access and also college completion, and then also student mobility after they get a degree. So today in our talk, we're going to use some environmental shocks in history to looking back into the history and use some economic analysis to understand, how this kind of environmental shocks, including natural disasters as an earthquake or as air pollutions, how this kind of environmental shocks actually influence how college access, completion, and also the student mobility after they get a degree. So why the research is important, right? Because we see two very important questions here. Because previously there have been a lot of research in economic literature, also higher education literature, talking about the brain drains and brain dries and brain circulation. So the concept or the idea is how to use preferential policies to attract global talents into a particular locality, like a nation, like a region, or even a city. So for instance, there'll be a lot of discussion about this kind of global knowledge hub, right, by John Mayer and his collaborators, and also talking about, particularly in the setting of the United States, how different states competing with college graduates. Also similar cases in China in terms of, how different prefecture cities launching all these very favorable policies to attract college graduates. However, if we ask ourselves the question the other way around, right, how negative shocks influence cities' attractiveness or countries' attractiveness to college students, the answer is very, very rare. We don't see a lot of research on this. So we ask ourselves, the questions, how the environmental or health shocks could produce this kind of short-term or even midterm or even long-term consequences, right? For instance, like the current pandemic. If we look back into the history, there'll be a lot of economic research on the Spanish flu in 1918, especially how this influenced a lot of early childhood health of the generation after the World War I because of the flu. But there wasn't a lot of discussion talking about other types of health shocks. So in our particular kind of research field, we ask, we know there have been a lot of environmental shocks, including the natural disasters. So what else has, what particular kind of natural disaster has been looked at? There'll be a lot of discussion on the negative shocks on individual and the social well-being in terms of earthquakes, tsunamis and hurricanes and floods, they're all different bunch of natural disasters. But the evidence, unfortunately, concentrated in very limited countries, especially the United States. There wasn't a lot of research on other countries, even though, there being a lot of natural disasters also in other countries. For instance, very rare evidence of research on developing countries, except for the H1N1 flu in Mexico in 2009. So even more interesting, even among the small literature looking at the environmental shocks or natural disasters on education, there are a lot of discussion on how the natural disasters, for instance, earthquake, influence educational attainment. For instance, in case of China, there have been studies on the Tangshan earthquake, which happens in 1976, how the Tangshan earthquake influenced educational attainment of the generation, they living around this area. Also, there have been a lot of discussion about, how natural disasters like the tsunamis or hurricanes influence the intergenerational educational transfer, and especially the growth of human capital in the very early childhood. For instance, for people who are 0 to 3 years old when they experience a natural disaster. However, as I said before, a lot of cumulative evidence was on K-12, not so much on higher education. So we ask for ourselves, right? So we are right now in the center of the storm, right? We were right now experiencing this hurricane, this pandemic. For instance, in China, although all the college resumed the offline teaching already, but we know many of the vocational college wasn't able to conduct it like vocational practical training because of the pandemic. So many students still affected, college students are still affected. Also look at the labor market. This year, China have more than 9 million students graduate many of them really have this kind of serious challenge in terms of finding jobs. So we decided to looking back into the history, taking a trip backwards, looking at some of the previous kind of environmental shocks and try to understand what happens in history and to inform our understanding of the current pandemic on our current students, especially for the, not for the, only for the students right now in the university, but for the students to come. Okay, so now I will introduce Dr. Lu Wei. He will present his research on natural disasters and high-stake exam performances evidence from 2008 Wenchuan earthquake. Okay, Dr. Lu, the floor is yours.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay. No, the previous page.
The previous page, okay.
The preceding page, yes. So this article is co-authored with Paul and Zheng Shiling and Zhou Sen. So I really appreciate their help and advice. Okay, next. So our research was motivated by the pandemic at the beginning, actually, because the spread of the virus and the quick lockdown in China reminded me and my colleagues that natural hazard, whether it's a pandemic or an earthquake, will cause a tremendous human capital loss that for the affected cohort. So though we cannot access the data related to the pandemic and its consequences right now, but we could still find something relevant to that topic. I mean, natural disasters and human capital assessment, right? So in this article, we are interested in investigating the linkage between large-scale natural disaster and students' performance in a high-stakes examination. And to the best of our knowledge, economic and education research on disasters and their consequences related to high-stakes exam is still limited. Okay, next. Next page, please.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah.
No, not that page. The preceding page. Yes. Okay. So the earthquake intensities. These two graphs, two pictures. What's wrong? Yes.
This is a
Okay.
page with two charts on the earthquake inventory.
Yes. Okay. So these two figures depicts the basic idea behind our research design. The earthquake intensity is measured in 6 levels using China seismic intensity scale, which is similar to the modified Mercalli intensity scale used in the US or other European countries, and to empirically identify the causal impacts of the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake. We examined differences in standard scores between NCE takers in affected and non-affected counties in Sichuan. And I noted the affected counties in figure 2, which were all labeled with a colored cross. Okay, so next page. So we utilize a unique individual level administrative database on college administrations in China, and the data set include every student who took the NCEE and was admitted to a 4-year college between 2005 and 2011. So we employed a generalized differences approach or framework that identified the causal effect of the earthquake damage on students' academic achievement the primary model specification in the majority of our analysis is displayed on the slide. So next. And basically the earthquake, we found that the earthquake reduced the students' performance or the standard score by 22% of the standard deviation. And interestingly, so the effect was, we found that exam takers exposed to the earthquake damage for a longer time experienced stronger negative impacts. Okay, next page. And other relevant findings include the effect was slightly greater for students who majored in the liberal arts track. And we combined geographical data to show that earthquake exposure lowers the students' probability of being accepted to an elite school or pursuing a major in a high salary field and other relevant topics. Okay, that's the basic findings reported in our article. And that's my presentation. Okay, let's welcome Yulian. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lu. Yulian, would you please to start it?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share our research about the impact of Wenchuan earthquake on college graduates' job location choice. Okay, next page. Thank you. So why this question is important? This question is based on two realities. First, more and more attention is paid to the introduction of skilled workers. Human capital, especially highly educated talents, is an important force of economic development. However, college graduates in China has been migrating to the Southeast Coast area for a long time, mainly because of the better economic development in this area. Second, natural disasters occur frequently in China, showing a geographical norm. Droughts occur frequently in the north, floods occur frequently in the south, typhoons occur frequently in the southeast coastal area. The earthquakes occur frequently in the southwest and northwest. Compared to other natural disasters, earthquakes are difficult to predict and do great harm. So is earthquake one of the reasons for the brain drain in Western China? Our next page. Our work related to three streams of literature. First, we are close to the study, analyze the factor affecting labor mobility. While this earlier study focused on economic factor and non-economic factor like air pollution and extreme weather, we focus on earthquake, which is unpredictable. Second, we contribute to a growing literature, analyze the consequence of natural disaster on labor markets. In construct with this study that focus on labor demand and supply, mention efficiency and wage, we are interested in the labor mobility of talents. There are low consistent findings about this topic, and different people react differently. Third, we contribute to a literature, analyze the impact of earthquake on people's behavior. While this earlier study focused on risk preference and human capital accumulation, we focus on human capital mobility. Okay, that's the page. We also explored Wenchuan earthquake, which is large and exogenous. Dr. Lu has already introduced it, so we won't repeat it again. Our empirical analysis attempted to trace the cause effects of devastating earthquake on skilled workers. National survey data on college graduates make this research flexible. The survey was designed and conducted by the Graduate School of Education at Peking University in each summer every 2 years. from 2003 to 2019. The data covered more than 116,000 graduates from 268 universities in 29 provinces. We exploit a difference in differences strategy to study the effects of Wenchuan earthquake. Then the next page will see what did we found. We first used a sample from 2007 to 2011 to study the short-term effects. We control individual characteristic, family background, school background, and economic development standards, and fixed effect of the school province, home province, and the year. In first columns, the interaction of earthquake and the school in Sichuan is this EQ times school Sichuan. Yes, the interaction is significantly negative. This indicating the decrease of the probability of graduates from university in Sichuan to work in Sichuan. Then we divided the sample into local and non-local group. Local group refer to students whose home province is the same as school province, while non-local group refer to students whose home province is not same as school province. In the second column of local of non-local, the interaction of earthquake and school in Sichuan is minus 0.41, while the interaction in the third column of local group is minus 0.17. The results indicated that students from other provinces are more likely to flee from Sichuan than local students after the earthquake. Next page, please. Next, the dynamic differences shows that the negative effects will not exist for a long time. We also did some heterogeneity analysis. We found that the higher academic achievement, the higher the probability of fleeing from Sichuan. And students majoring in humanities and social science or economics and management get away from Sichuan, while students major in science and engineering didn't. Through the mechanism analysis, we found that the main reason for fleeing from Sichuan is the fear of earthquake rather than the labor market change. Thank you, everybody. This is my part, and then we and this is Dr. Zhong.
Okay, thank you very much, Yulian, for a wonderful presentation. Next, we welcome Dr. Zhong Zekai. He's going to talk about air pollution and how air pollution affects college students' job location choice.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm very honored to share our working paper. Next page, thank you. Actually, I am initially motivated by my personal experience. I'm a Cantonese. Before coming to Beijing, I still year for working in Beijing. However, now I prefer to go back to working in Guangdong because of the serious air pollution in Beijing. So I'm curious as well, other students be affected by air pollution when they choose job location? Actually, some researchers find that more and more labors understands this health risks of air pollution and adopt avoidance behaviors, especially outflow. However, few literature studies the impact of air pollution on the graduates' mobility. In recent years, cities in China compete for higher education graduates with favorable employment policies, including high salary, housing subsidies, talents apartment, and so on. However, in addition to economic factors, the environmental quality has become a city's main feature to attract talents. A typical evidence in China is that air pollution leads to massive people living from the north to the south. In summary, this paper focuses on the impacts of air pollution on graduates' mobility. Next page. Okay, this paper is closely related to two types of literature. The first one is about the factors affecting graduates' job location choice. Some researchers find that economic factors are the most important pull to attract labor force. However, Dr. Novak believes that labor mobility also depends on urban livability. Some researchers find that the factors affecting graduates' mobility include individual, family, school, and regional factors. The second literature is about the migration effect of air pollution. Research on the immigration find that high air quality has a significant positive effect on population's inflow, and research on the emigration find that air pollution leads to a population's outflow. However, few literature studied the impacts of air pollution on the graduates' mobility. Lian Zhang find that poor air quality has a negative impact on foreign students coming to China. And Zheng uses the data of graduates from Tsinghua University and shows that air pollution significantly reduces the probability of elite graduates stay in Beijing. However, this paper has limitations. The samples are limited and lacking of exploring the mechanism. Our study makes 2 contributions to the literature. Our sample covers 52 colleges in 30 cities. Then we explore 2 mechanisms and analyze the reasons why the unbalanced regional development between the north and the south in China become more serious. Okay, next page. To identify the effects, we merge air quality data with the national survey data on college graduates to carry out our empirical research. And the analysis sample covers 14,592 observations. We adopt a LPM model as follows. The dependent variable is choice equals 1 if student chooses to stay in graduated city. The main independent variable is PM2.5 of graduated city, including absolute value and a relative value. The relative value means the ratio of PM2.5 of the graduated city to the employment cities. And we use the relative value because although they live for another city, the employment city may be more polluted. Okay, next page. Basic estimates results are reported in table 1. Find that the absolute PM2.5 for graduated city has no significant effect when all variables are controlled. The next 3 columns show that relative PM2.5 has a negative significant effect on graduates choosing to work in graduated city. And then we take some robustness tests, including changing models, the main independent variable, dependent variable, and samples, as well as using the wind speed as IV instrument to estimate, verifying the basic result is robust. Okay, next page. Next, we explore 2 mechanisms that's how air pollution affects graduates' choice. The first one is health awareness. We find that if the graduates' hometown are in high air pollution, or the graduates are sport lover or choose an outdoor job, they will be more sensitive to air pollution. It means air pollution affects graduates' mobility through the concern about health and awareness of the harmfulness of air pollution. The second one is opportunity effects. We find that the graduates who are highly educated, graduates from 985 universities, receive more offers, or the graduates from high income families are more sensitive to air pollution because they have more opportunities to choose employment city. More interestingly, in table 5, we find that air pollution leads to the loss of graduates' welfare. Graduates choose to work in cities with clean air at the cost of a low income, low job satisfaction, and job education mismatches in major and degree. And table 6 shows that if relative PM2.5 of graduated city is higher, the probability of graduates choosing to live for southern cities will be higher, especially the highly educated graduates. The results indicate that air pollution is one of the major reasons that's why the unbalance between the north and the south in China become more serious. That's all my findings, and our findings indicates policy implications for cities to attract talents through environmental improvement. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Zhong Zekai. Thank you very much. Now, I just want to summarize all the three papers very briefly. I think the marginal contribution we make to the literature, even though the methodology may be foreign to the higher education researchers, but I think the content is really relevant. I think that all these studies, they represent the systematic evaluation on the impacts of environmental shocks on college access and graduate mobility. Because right now, China is not only the largest producer of college graduates, also the largest consumer of college graduates. So I think Chinese experiences in terms of how environmental shocks influence students' mobility and also college access will be relevant to other countries who also, have this kind of high participating countries with a large share of the younger cohort going to higher education. The second one, we believe we make the contribution is we make this kind of estimation of the causal impact of environmental shocks on higher education. Because we're not only taking this national college entrance examination data for over a couple of years, also we use this college graduate employment data over more than 10 years. So this is really the first cut using this kind of econometrics technology to estimate and identify the causal impact. Lastly, I believe our papers, our research contribute to the understanding of how COVID-19 might influence higher education in short and midterms. We know the COVID-19 interrupted a lot of international mobility of students across countries, but now here we show even an environmental shock within the country can interrupt student mobility among regions, among cities. So considering how the COVID-19 might have, in terms of college access, right, and also in terms of mobility of college graduates. So I think maybe this is a starting point to consider this kind of long-term or mid-term consequences and join our efforts to discussing the solutions. Thank you very much for listening. We come from Graduate School of Education and also Institute of Economics of Education. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks. Dr. Yang.
Thank you very much for your presentations, wonderful presentations, and a lot of information and a lot for us to digest. And we know that doing higher education research, we know that these natural disasters have influences on higher education, on students, on how we operate higher education, but we need this kind of evidence, empirical evidence to demonstrate and show us how these kind of influences play out in reality. And thank you for your contributions in this respect. While we are waiting for more questions to come in the chat box, I'd like to use my privilege as the chair to ask a couple of things first. So there are different pieces of research that you have covered. I wonder if you could talk more about the implications for policies, and because we have heard some of the research findings and how these natural disasters, air pollution and earthquakes can influence students' decision and their outcomes in college access. But how could these phenomena that we have reviewed to be tackled or addressed by the policies, and also in these when the natural disaster was ongoing, for example, when the earthquake was still happening in 2008, when the college entrance examination was very close, how did those policies play out in response to these disasters?
Okay, maybe I go first, and then my colleagues can share their opinions. I think thank you very much for the nice comments. Especially, I think the question of policy implications is really important. Especially, this research is pretty much very hardcore economics. So how can I inform our policy regarding higher education? I think two things come into my mind. First, I think very importantly to especially consider current pandemic or the earthquake have this kind of a long-term impact. So the policy, especially the rescue policy or remedy policy, should not be short-term. It should consider the midterm and long-term consequences. Especially, I think Dr. Lu will have more to share. What he finds is, the Ventura earthquake, even though it's very dramatic in 2008, the student was actually postponed their college entrance examination by 1 month. but the test score was not so much influenced as a student who take the college entrance examination the year after and the 2 year after. So that was a student who were in the grade 11 or grade 10 who were more affected. But the preferential policy, only giving to the student who immediately influenced by the earthquake. So the remedy, or even considering the college access impact, maybe we should have the kind of, emergency plan taking consideration, more generation will be influenced. The second one is really looking at the broad picture of policy implications, not only focus on the, for instance, like I said before, many of the research on the GPAs or on the grade point average or the degree completion, but we find even among the students who graduate, they were really influenced because their choice set, they want to leave, right? Dr. Cao Yulian showed us, right? For students who originally come from Sichuan, they stay. But for students who coming from other provinces, they leave, right? Because, this is really something when we consider, student mobility, especially high-skilled workers, their domestic or international mobilities. This kind of, environmental shocks really have a long-term impact, like a negative shock to the city's attractiveness. So maybe the policy consideration should be also have this kind of long-term horizon rather than a short-term period. Yeah, so I'm stop here. Thank you.
Do other presenters want to add any comments?
Here. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe the earthquake is unavoidable, but the air pollution can be controlled. Yeah, actually in China, the air pollution reached the peak in 2015. But in recent years, the government have taken some measures to control the air pollution, like they shut down some enterprise in heavy industry, and they were granting the subsidies for some new energy car enterprise, or prohibits the carbon emission. Like in these 2 years, our government make a policy about the carbon peak and carbon neutralization. Yeah, do you know? Two policies. Yes, I think it is. Yeah, it is important to control the air pollution. Yeah, this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Lu, you want to add?
Okay, so yes, as Zekai said, the air quality is becoming much better in China, both in Beijing and in other areas in China. So because in our research in the paper I mentioned above, due to data limitations, we cannot observe students in 2012 and in the after years. So because presumably accumulated exposure to the aftermath of natural disaster will lead to increasingly negative impacts for cohorts who had just entered the primary school relative to those nearly completing high school education, right? So I guess future research is more oriented to discuss that topic and give us a better understanding of the quake's long-term impact or damaging effects, which can be more useful for informing the targeted group and sustain the aid policy. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I actually have some follow-up questions, and especially in relation to the air pollution and also the earthquakes, but I will hold them for now because we have David Law who is waiting to ask his questions. David, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
My name is David. I work in a small university in the UK, and I'm the director of global partnerships for that university. We're actually working with a university in Shanghai about sustainability issues and trying to involve students from both universities in working on this. I thought it was a very good point that was made by ZHONG Zekai about the distinction between different kinds of natural disasters and sustainability problems, some of which can be solved and others which cannot be solved. But many of those which can be solved, of course, can only be solved by international action. So their impact is often very local, but their solution is actually international. And indeed, the remedial action which is needed to cope with a disaster like the Sichuan earthquake was not simply from Sichuan province, but it was a national response to that really big event in that province. So my question is to ask for comment, if you can, please, about China's perception of these sustainability issues. It seems to me to have come much more into the foreground in recent years. Certainly your president's declaration about carbon zero to the UN, I think, was very well received across the world. And of course, COP26 was an important event recently. But can you say something about the ways in which you would see perhaps Chinese universities, but more generally, the understanding of these kinds of problems and the way to make solutions to these problems?
Thank you very much for the questions, David. Thank you very much. I think it's very timely issues right now, especially we just, after the COP26 and also a lot of discussion also in China. I think there's I think you're right in terms of national consciousness of sustainability issues right now. I think it's really a timely topic, and there have been a lot of actions, at least from the higher education side. I'll give you two examples. First, one of my doctoral students work in Tsinghua University. So Tsinghua University right now is designing a master degree program on carbon neutralization. And they intended to develop the program into a professional master, maybe a professional PhD program in the near future. So the focus really consolidated this kind of different disciplines within Tsinghua University to design this interdisciplinary research program. With a perspective of not only as an education program, but also as a collective, action among university communities to deal with the issue. Not, as a, one discipline to deal with the problem, but rather involve other disciplines, even sociology and education, So every department or every discipline's faculties have an involvement, have a say in the program. So people really, collectively making this possible, and also they share the vision of the program as well. So that's one. The other thing I think is recently there have been a lot of university research alliances on this issue as well. Carbon zero, carbon neutralization, especially I think Beijing Aeronautic University and the Tsinghua universities, and many, I think, European, also UK universities, building up this kind of research and also educational synergy to deal with the issue. But at least from our research, what I'm taking from our research is people do react to environmental issues, even though they didn't talk about so much the behavior, they change the behaviors according to the issues. So I think more important is really to have this kind of social consciousness about the issue and the discussion about this. Even now we know students do act to the air pollution. So what can we do, right? So really give much information on this, right? To help them to make the informed choices. I think that's critical, especially from Dr. Cao Yulian's research. I think she mentioned students in the humanities, social sciences more sensitive to the earthquake rather than the student in the science track. So they tell us something, right? Because maybe people have a more kind of science literacy, they are more reasonable in a sense, or dealing with all these kind of unfortunate events. So I think education is really important to also inform the public, general public about this, and also have this kind of university-wide discussion and to help not only the faculty and students, but also with society at large. I think very critical. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Sure.
Any other presenters who want to come in and add any points?
Okay, so I guess David is seeking for something more general, or a general suggestion of findings, right?
Yes, I mean,
yes, okay.
I think that we are part of the problem and we need to be part of the solution.
Yes.
we encourage students to fly from China to the UK and to other countries, and we have a very large number of your students in our country, and I think we have a responsibility to try and solve some of those problems.
Okay, so because as reflected in our article, a natural disaster is not neutral because it will hurt more on the vulnerable group. Say because our findings show that students with relatively low performance rankings will be hurt by the earthquake more stronger. So that's why our policy aid should target on them and to help them better prepare for their future study or life. That's the basic suggestion reflected in our research. Yes, I guess it will be more general as you expected.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. If we do not have any other comments to add, I'd like to ask another follow-up question, which is also related to David's question. So you mentioned that, I particularly like the idea that there are different types of natural disasters, and air pollution can be very different from others, and earthquakes, because we can do something to tackle air pollution. So my question is related to what we call an industrial or labor market structure of the specific cities in China, because we know that when students are making their decisions in terms of whether to go to to enter college or for their employment, they may also consider what types of jobs they can be offered in the city. And also the air pollution, the degree of air pollution is also associated with the industrial structure of the city. If the city is largely dependent on heavy industry, then there might be a lot higher level of air pollution. And then for other cities, for example, that are looking at tourism, then the situation might be different. So I'm wondering, in your view, the reviewed graduates' perceptions and attitudes towards air pollution in their mobility decision making, what were the implications for cities' overall strategies, including those associated with industrial structure, using the popular term that we often use in China, the industrial upgrading, 产业升级. So how would that have implications for the cities in planning in the longer term or a mid-term run, and how could higher education work with industry and with government in a consorted way in tackling such natural disasters, at least for those that we can work on, like air pollution, and while sustaining the economic development? Paul, you want to come in, or Dr. Lu?
Zekai. It's also related to air pollution, I guess.
Yeah, I try it. Yeah, I mentioned a word. Yeah, northeastization. Yeah, it means the three northeastern province. Yeah, Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning. Yeah, is in recession. Yeah, in these years. And Tianjin, do you know Tianjin? Yeah, is become the northeasternization. Yeah, because they developed the economy in the heavy industry, but like Shenzhen developed economy by develop the high tech industry, and they attract talents. Shenzhen is in the air quality in Shenzhen is good. Yeah, but the high tech industry is also better in Shenzhen. So I think the air pollution and development may not be controversial. Yeah, it is my my idea. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Zekai. Let me just add a couple of words react to Lili's question. Wonderful questions. I think the industrial or the labor market conditions of the local market, of course, highly related to the air pollution level. Like you mentioned, you know, in the north part of China, the poor air quality have actually lead to what we call environmental refugees, right? People actually fleeing out of that area, especially coming out for higher education. We know a lot of families sending their kids to you know, Shanghai or to Guangdong just for, they don't want their kids to continue to stay in the north part of China. So that's happening right now. Of course, there have been a lot of concerted efforts among local government, especially in the highly polluted regions, right? To kind of doing this kind of industrial upgrading to not only to deal with the issue of population loss, but also to improve the general well-being of the local residents. So we have been seeing a lot of efforts on that. But the main issue right now is really about this kind of talent competition among cities. Because, you know, all these highly polluted regions doesn't really have the resources to compete because they have multi issues to deal with. So right now, I think the general, especially regarding your question about how education can help, I think higher education actually can help a lot because, you know, the vulnerability of the city, especially due to the air pollution, can be improved. If the local universities or the local research institutions really contribute in terms of not only technology, but also environmental awareness, I think that would be really helpful. For instance, in the city of Harbin, where my husband comes from, Harbin University of Institute of Science and Technology really do a lot of high-tech technology to improve the air quality of the local communities. On the other hand, the university also collaborated with the municipal government of Shenzhen to have their own campuses on Shenzhen. So this is kind of, you know, they bring technology in, they produce not only local, but also in remote campuses, but to dealing with environmental issues. So that kind of, we see, you know, I think David actually make the comments. The disasters may be local, but the solution is national or even global, I would say in that sense. So I hope we see more and more, especially, you know, this kind of maybe collaboration between UK and Chinese universities can help to solve the local pollution issues in China. I think that will be something we alluded to, right? Because right now our research show it does help, it does influence people's choice, but we want to improve. So how can we improve? Maybe that's a big question other than our research, but we do hope generate this kind of a discussion for the future discussion. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good comment and a good response. And I totally agree that this is the solution is not just local, but also national and global. And perhaps sometimes we can also look at other countries' experiences. For example, Japan, which is typically a typical country that is good at tackling and responding to natural disasters. Perhaps we could also learn from them as well. Before I ask further questions, I'd like to invite Cristina Di Cavallo to ask your question. Cristina.
Thank you, Lili. Congratulations all for this wonderful webinar. It's really important for us. I am from Brazil. I'm professor at University of Brasilia. So these questions, these issues is really important in Latin America as well. The air pollution, not hair cake not so common in Brazil, is not happened, but flood is very common. So I'd like to ask you, between air pollution and hair cakes in your research, which are both produce the worst effect in domestic mobility of college students and job opportunities in short and long term? I think these questions complemented Lili questions, I think, because it's another way to see these problems inside university as well. So thank you so much for our presentations, really important for us. It's a new subject to deal with environment in general. Thank you.
Dr. Yulian, would you like to address maybe first? Thank you.
Oh, okay. I understand the question, but I think maybe we have to do some more research to compare the two effects. In fact, we didn't compare compare the two research, so we can't get a conclusion, I think. Yeah.
Okay, if I understand, Christina, you're asking, compare earthquake to the air pollution, right, which have this longer kind of bigger impacts on the labor market performance in short and long terms. That's a very critical question because, if we have only limited money, we want to know which one we deal first, right? Like this kind of unpredicted earthquake or environmental shocks or air pollution we deal with every day. I think in general, we don't have the answer yet. As Dr. Yulian just mentioned, we need more research on this, but we do conduct some we call welfare analysis to compare, how these kind of air pollutions, the cause of air pollution to society in large. So we do have some preliminary estimates on this, but we haven't done this for the earthquake. So we know the job losses, especially in terms of keeping the talented in the local localities. It's very difficult for the city with a higher air pollution level, even though their higher education institutions is okay, right? For instance, like I mentioned, for instance, if the university in Shanghai want to keep their graduates, they put 100% they can do that. But if the university in north part of China is very difficult. So in terms of short-term and long-term influence, we don't know about the long-term because air pollution was really an issue. It's only people only aware of the problem around 2008, around the Olympic Games in Beijing, right? We see the air pollution, we know that. I think, but also we can consider other issues happens because China was having this booming labor market. So they're taking care of a lot of the negative shocks. So we don't know for sure which one is more serious, but I think air pollution, as Dr. Lili mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of policy measures being taken up to deal with that. So we know, even though it's very serious, but we know some of the solution to this. But for the earthquake, we know some research on the earthquake in Italy and also in Japan, especially the research on Italy. They said, they're going to have a kind of midterm impact on the college graduates because the local labor market really declined a lot because of this, But on the other hand, depends on the industry. For instance, construction was really thriving, but other, basic services was damaged seriously. So the civil servants' job lost. So yeah, it really depends. We need more research on this to address your question. But I think that really, as you suggest, is really a promising direction. Maybe we can go in conjunction because the environmental issues was a common shock to the globe. Maybe we can join together our research together to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we do not have more comments from our presenters, then I'd like to very quickly ask another question because I'm aware that I'm conscious of the time and we're nearly approaching to the end of the webinar. So my feeling is that these natural disasters are very closely related to the equity in relation to higher education, not only higher education, but also to wider society, the regional inequalities in China, and these air pollutions are kind of, in my understanding, are exaggerating the inequality gaps between different regions. So I wonder if at the national, the central governmental level, if you have come up with or come across with any policies or any decisions that are specifically tackling with these equity issues.
Dr. Lu, you want to go first?
No, you first.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, thank you very much, Dr. Yang. I think you are really key to the point, right? We already have this kind of regional disparity or regional inequality. I think the natural disaster actually enlarged the impact of this kind of inequality. I think in terms of policy, especially higher education policy, I think there's not so much space for higher education policy to really addressing this issue. But I think higher education could be part of the solution, especially in terms of regional development strategy. For instance, right now we see a lot of, for instance, in the Guangdong or in the Pearl River Delta region or the Yangtze River Delta region, we see a lot of this kind of consolidated efforts. So they decided to, to put this kind of heavy polluted industrial bases out of the region. So this is so-called industry upgrading. So instead of one city deal with the issue, we have the region taking the whole region as a unit of analysis. They have this kind of consolidated efforts to deal with the issue. I think that will be, this kind of interregional collaboration will reduce to some extent this kind of negative shocks, especially due to air pollution, because you cannot solve your air pollution of your own city. You have to have many cities to do it together. Like in the case of Beijing, it's not Beijing, it's whole Hebei provinces to help, right? So we can solve the problem. Second one, I think in terms of, so that's talking about, not only one region or one city deal with the issue alone, but we need a joint effort. The second one is really go beyond higher education, because higher education is only one of the partners in this collaborating effort. I think right now we need more like a social welfare policy, if you like, because this is really basic human rights, to breathe a clear air or to live without fear of the earthquake. So I think there's a more, maybe in the next step, this is really an interdisciplinary research area. We higher education researchers to talk with other, scientists and also environmental NGO to really find the solution together rather than, solve the problem only by higher education. Alone, I think is insufficient. Yeah, that's my impression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And because we are already 1 minute over the past 4. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our presenters today. I know it's very late in China. Thank you very much for your contributions and a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you very much. And thank you also to our audiences and participants. The recordings of the webinar will be available online very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang. Thank you very much. Thank you.